Max had always thought that his life in the intergalactic city would remain calm and uneventful. As a human living on a distant planet, he worked as a translator for alien diplomats, helping bridge the gap between different species. His job was interesting, but never exciting. He spent most of his days translating complex agreements and dealing with the challenges of cross-species communication. But one evening, everything changed. The Grand Hall was buzzing with activity as ambassadors and dignitaries from various planets gathered for a formal event. Max had been invited as a translator for the human delegation, which was why he found himself standing at the edge of the room, quietly observing. His job was to make sure that there were no misunderstandings between the guests, all of whom came from different worlds. He didn't mind the routine, but it was far from thrilling. That was until he met Lyra. She stood across the room, her presence undeniable. Lyra was an alien from a distant star system, tall and elegant with striking silver eyes that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. She was a member of the Tevalan race, intelligent, logical, and known for their analytical minds. Despite her beauty, there was something cool and distant about her, a quality Max had always noticed in her species. They were driven by reason, not emotion. They valued intellect over feelings, and relationships were often based on mutual benefit rather than affection. Max had never met anyone like her before. Lyra's reputation as a brilliant diplomat preceded her, but there was a certain mystery about her. He had seen her interact with others at various events, but they had never spoken. Tonight, however, as if fate had decided, she approached him. "Max, is it?" she asked, her voice calm, almost too calm. "Yes," he replied, a bit startled. He wasn't used to someone like her coming up to him directly. "I've been observing you," she said, her silver eyes narrowing just slightly as if studying him carefully. "You're very good at what you do. Your translations are precise. Your understanding of cultural nuances impressive." Max blinked in surprise. He wasn't used to compliments, especially from someone as distant as Lyra. "Thank you," he said, his voice unsure. "I try to make sure there are no misunderstandings." Lyra gave a small nod, her gaze never leaving his face. "I appreciate that. It's important for our people to have clear communication. But I've been thinking." She paused, as if carefully choosing her words. "About human emotions." Max frowned slightly. He wasn't sure where this conversation was going. "Human emotions?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. "Yes," Lyra said, her voice steady but with an air of curiosity. "Your species experiences such powerful emotions. I've been reading about it, studying it. It fascinates me." She took a step closer to him, her presence making him feel suddenly aware of the difference between them, an alien with eyes that could see beyond his own limited understanding. Max didn't know what to say. Emotions were a part of life for humans, of course, but it wasn't something he expected to discuss with an alien, especially not with someone like Lyra. He had heard rumors that Tevalans didn't understand emotions the way humans did. Their species was more focused on logic, efficiency, and practicality. "I've been wondering," she continued, her tone casual, "if you might be interested in an experiment." Max raised an eyebrow. "An experiment?" he repeated, trying to make sense of her words. "What kind of experiment?" Lyra didn't look at all uncomfortable. In fact, she seemed completely calm, as though she was talking about something as ordinary as the weather. "I've studied your emotions from a distance," she said, her voice steady. "But I've come to believe that experiencing them firsthand would give me a deeper understanding. I would like to propose that we become partners." Max's mind raced. Partner? What did she mean by that? He couldn't help but think of the strange way she said it, as though it was a suggestion, but at the same time, it felt like more than that. "I'm not sure I understand," Max said, his confusion growing. "Are you asking me to be in a relationship?" Lyra nodded, her expression unchanged. "Yes, not in the traditional sense. I simply wish to experience what it's like to feel the emotions that come with a human relationship. I studied your people, but to truly understand, I need to experience it myself." Max was speechless. A part of him wanted to laugh, thinking she was joking. But the look in her eyes told him she wasn't. She was serious. "You want us to be partners, so you can study my emotions?" Max asked, his voice a little incredulous. "Correct," Lyra replied without hesitation. "I find human emotions fascinating. I believe that through this partnership, I will gain insights that could be valuable not only for me, but for my entire species. The Tevelans are logical beings, and while we have no issues with emotions in theory, we cannot comprehend them fully. Your species is different. I wish to learn how your emotions work, how they influence decisions and relationships." Max looked at her, still not sure what to think. It felt like the strangest proposal he had ever heard, but there was something about Lyra's calm, direct nature that made him hesitate. She wasn't asking for love or affection, at least not in the way he understood it. She wanted to study emotions, to understand them in a way that only humans could experience. After a long pause, Max finally said, "I'm not sure what this would mean, but I suppose we could try it." Lyra's eyes flickered with something like satisfaction, though her expression remained mostly neutral. "Good. Then we shall begin." And just like that, Max found himself agreeing to something he hadn't fully understood, stepping into an unknown world with an alien who wanted to learn about his emotions. Little did he know, this casual proposal was about to change his life forever. Max had never expected that one casual conversation with Lyra would lead to anything serious. Yet here he was, agreeing to be her partner in an experiment to understand human emotions. It felt surreal, almost like he was dreaming. But as strange as it was, he couldn't deny the curiosity building inside him. What would it be like to have an alien as a partner? And more importantly, what did she really want from him? The first few days after their conversation passed in a blur. Max spent most of his time thinking about Lyra's proposal, trying to make sense of what it meant. He wasn't sure if he should treat it like a scientific experiment, or if there was something more to it. Lyra hadn't exactly explained the details, but he knew she was serious about wanting to learn about human emotions. Their first meeting after the proposal was awkward. Max wasn't sure how to act around her. He wasn't used to someone being so direct and analytical about emotions. He had grown up believing that feelings were something personal, something that couldn't be easily explained or studied like facts. But Lyra didn't seem to share that view. She was calm, composed, and every word she spoke seemed carefully chosen. "Max," she said during their first sit-down meeting, "I want to understand your emotions better. How do you feel when you're happy? How do you express your sadness? Can you describe the difference between love and affection?" Max blinked, caught off guard. He wasn't used to being asked such personal questions so openly. I don't know if I can describe it," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "It's just how you feel in the moment, I guess. Happiness makes you feel light, like everything is going right. Sadness, it feels heavy, like the weight of the world is on your shoulders." Lyra listened intently, her eyes not leaving his face. She was studying him, analyzing every word he said. It felt like being under a microscope. Max couldn't help but wonder if she was taking notes in her mind, cataloging everything about him like some kind of specimen. "Interesting," Lyra said after a long pause. "Human emotions are more complex than I imagined. They are not just reactions to external events, but deep, internal states that shape your behavior. I believe that understanding these emotions could benefit my people." Max wasn't sure what to say to that. It all felt so strange, but he found himself intrigued by Lyra's perspective. She wasn't asking him for anything unreasonable, just a chance to explore something that was very natural to him. And as the days went on, their conversations started to feel less like an experiment and more like a real connection. They began to meet more regularly, spending hours talking about everything from childhood memories to hopes for the future. Max found himself opening up to Lyra in ways he hadn't expected. Despite her logical nature, Lyra had a way of making him feel comfortable, like it was okay to talk about things that were normally too personal. One evening, they met at a quiet cafe on the edge of the city. It was a small, cozy place with soft lighting and the hum of distant chatter. Max arrived first, ordering a drink as he waited for Lyra to join him. When she walked in, her presence seemed to command attention, even in a place as relaxed as this. She was calm, graceful, and everything about her seemed perfectly put together. Yet there was something about her eyes, a flicker of curiosity, a quiet wonder, that made Max think she wasn't as distant as she appeared. Lyra sat down across from him, her eyes scanning the room briefly before meeting his. "Max, I've been thinking more about emotions," she said, her voice soft yet serious. "The way you describe happiness and sadness is unlike anything I've ever experienced. I've read about them, of course, but hearing you talk about them makes me want to understand it on a deeper level." Max smiled slightly, feeling more at ease. It's not something that can be explained easily. Emotions are messy. They don't always make sense. You can feel happy one moment, and then sad the next, sometimes without any clear reason. Lyra nodded, her expression thoughtful. But isn't that what makes emotions so powerful? The unpredictability. I've been taught that logic is the key to understanding the universe. But it seems like emotions have their own kind of logic, a logic that cannot be easily calculated. Max felt a strange sense of connection in that moment. For all her cold, logical exterior, Lyra was beginning to show signs of genuine curiosity. She wasn't just asking questions for her own benefit. She was starting to care about the answers. "Yeah," Max said, his voice softer now. "I guess they do. I don't know if I can teach you everything about human emotions, but I'll try. We can figure it out together." Lyra smiled, a rare expression that softened her features. It wasn't the kind of smile Max had expected from her. Cool, controlled, but something warmer, more genuine. "Thank you, Max. I'm starting to understand that emotions aren't something to be studied from a distance. They need to be experienced." Over the next few weeks, their partnership grew into something more than just an experiment. Max began to notice that Lyra was changing too. She was becoming more expressive, more open. She laughed at his jokes, even when they weren't funny, and she would sometimes share small details about her own life, things she hadn't talked about before. Her cold, analytical nature was still there, but now it seemed to coexist with something softer, more human. Max wasn't sure when it happened, but somewhere along the way, his feelings for Lyra had started to shift. What had begun as a strange agreement to help her understand emotions had turned into something deeper. He didn't know if it was love, but there was definitely something real between them now. And as he looked across the table at her that evening, with her silver eyes focused on him with such intensity, Max realized that the experiment was no longer just about emotions. It was about the connection they were building together, a connection that neither of them had expected, but both were beginning to cherish. As the days passed, Max and Lyra spent more time together. The initial awkwardness had faded, and now their conversations felt comfortable. They met frequently, whether it was in quiet cafes, the park, or even during long walks around the city. Max had grown used to Lyra's presence. In fact, he found himself looking forward to their meetings. It was strange how something so unexpected could become so important. One afternoon, Max was sitting at his favorite bench in the park, waiting for Lyra. The weather was perfect, clear skies, a light breeze rustling the leaves, and for the first time in a while, Max felt at peace. He had never been one to rush into relationships, but there was something about Lyra that drew him in. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met before. She was intelligent, curious, and had an air of mystery that made him want to know more. Lyra arrived a few minutes later, her usual calm and collected demeanor present as always. She was dressed in simple clothes, blending in as much as possible, but even in such an ordinary outfit, she carried herself with an undeniable elegance. "Max," she said, her voice warm as she approached him, I hope I'm not keeping you waiting." "No, not at all," Max replied with a smile, standing up to greet her. "I've been thinking about what you said last time. About emotions. It's been on my mind too." Lyra tilted her head, her silver eyes studying him closely. "What about emotions has been on your mind?" Max scratched the back of his neck, unsure of how to explain. "I guess I've been thinking about how we express them, how we show what we feel. You know, we talk about love, happiness, and sadness, but it's hard to really put those feelings into words." Lyra nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, I've been thinking the same. There's so much that words cannot capture. It's fascinating, isn't it? The depth of emotion that can exist in someone's heart without ever being spoken aloud." Max smiled softly. "Exactly. Sometimes, the most important emotions are the ones you don't say out loud." They sat down on the bench together, the quiet hum of the park surrounding them. Max felt at ease, almost as if he had known Lyra for much longer than he actually had. The chemistry between them was undeniable, but it wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, something more real. Lyra, too, seemed to feel it. Over time, she had begun to show more of herself. She wasn't just the alien researcher anymore. She was Lyra, the woman who had become a friend, and perhaps something more. Her curiosity about human emotions had evolved into a deeper interest in Max himself. She no longer asked questions just for the sake of learning. Now she seemed genuinely interested in him. "I've been thinking about emotions too," Lyra said, her voice soft but steady. "I feel like I'm beginning to understand them better. But there's still something I don't get. Why do people sometimes push away the very emotions that make them feel alive? Why do they hide love, or joy, or even sadness?" Max frowned, considering her words. "I think it's because emotions can be scary sometimes. Love, for example, it makes you vulnerable. If you love someone, you open yourself up to the possibility of losing them. That's hard to face. So, some people shut those feelings down, even though they really want to feel them." Lyra was quiet for a moment, her eyes lost in thought. "So, emotions are not just reactions. They are choices too. The choice to love. The choice to open your heart." Max nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think so." It was in that moment that Max realized how much Lyra had already impacted him. She wasn't just some alien trying to study him. She was someone who had opened his eyes to the way he viewed emotions, someone who had made him think about his own feelings in ways he hadn't before. And he could see it in her too. Lyra had changed. She wasn't as distant as she once was. She laughed now, a genuine sound that made Max's heart skip a beat. She would share little pieces of her world with him, stories of her home planet, and in turn, Max found himself opening up in ways he hadn't with anyone else. "Max," Lyra said, her voice breaking through his thoughts, "I have something to ask you." He looked at her, startled by the serious tone in her voice. "What's that?" She hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "Do you ever think about what we're doing here? About us? I mean, I know this started as an experiment, but I feel something between us. I can't deny it. I just wonder if you feel it too." Max's heart raced. He hadn't expected her to bring it up so directly, but there it was. The unspoken tension that had been building between them had finally been acknowledged. "I do," Max said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been thinking about it a lot. It's strange. But yes, I feel something. Something more than just friendship, more than just an experiment." Lyra's eyes softened, and for the first time, Max saw a vulnerability in her that he hadn't seen before. She wasn't just the curious alien who wanted to understand human emotions. She was a woman with feelings, with a heart that had somehow come to care for him. Max reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The simple act felt natural, as if it had always been meant to happen. "I don't know where this is going," Max continued, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. "But I want to find out. Together." Lyra smiled, her eyes shining with something that wasn't just curiosity. It was hope. Together, she repeated softly. And in that moment, under the warm glow of the setting sun, both Max and Lyra knew that they had crossed a line. No longer just two strangers from different worlds. They were now two people who had found something special, something that could not be explained in words, but only felt in the heart. The days passed, and with each one, Max and Lyra grew closer. Their bond, once a curiosity, had become something more meaningful. They spent hours talking, laughing, and learning about each other's worlds. Max had never expected that he'd connect with someone, especially not someone from another planet. But with Lyra, it felt natural. She had become more than a stranger. She was someone he cared about deeply. One evening, they were sitting at their usual spot in the park. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden hue over the city. The air was calm, and the only sounds were the soft rustling of leaves in the trees and the distant hum of the city. For the first time in a long while, Max felt at peace. Lyra, as always, was an enigma. There were still many things about her past, her home planet, that she had not shared, and Max was beginning to wonder if he would ever learn the full truth. But despite the mystery surrounding her, he found himself trusting her. He knew she was honest with him, at least in the ways that mattered most. "Max," Lyra said, breaking the silence. She was sitting close to him, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes focused on the horizon. "I need to ask you something. It's important." Max turned to her, his heart beating a little faster. The seriousness in her voice made him feel a sudden sense of nervousness. "What is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice soft, but filled with emotion. "I never expected to feel this way about anyone, especially not a human. But I can't deny it anymore. I care about you, Max, more than I thought I ever could." Max's heart skipped a beat. He had known that something had been growing between them, but hearing her say it out loud, so openly and honestly, sent a wave of warmth through him. "I care about you too, Lyra," Max replied, his voice sincere. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I've been feeling the same way. But there's something I need to ask too." Lyra turned to him, her silver eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. "What is it?" Max hesitated. He wasn't sure how to phrase it, but he knew he had to ask. "What happens now? We're from different worlds. We live in different realities. I don't know what the future holds for us, Lyra, but I don't want to lose this." Lyra sat quietly for a moment, contemplating his words. Max could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the same questions swirling in her mind. "I don't know what the future holds either, Max," she said at last. "But I'm willing to find out. With you." Max smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "That's all I need to hear." They sat there for a while, just the two of them, letting the moment sink in. The world around them felt distant, as if they were in their own little bubble. In that space, nothing else mattered, only the connection they shared. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, Lyra spoke again. "I've been keeping something from you, Max. Something important." Max looked at her, his curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Lyra took a deep breath, her expression serious. "I'm not just here to learn about human emotions. There's more to my mission. I'm here to observe everything. I've been sent by my people to study your world, to gather information about Earth and its people." Max felt a pang in his chest. He had suspected that there was something more to her arrival, something deeper. But hearing it confirmed felt like a cold splash of water. "I see," he said quietly. "So this was just part of your assignment." Lyra shook her head quickly, her eyes softening. "No, Max, that's not what I mean. I came here to observe, yes. But in doing so, I've learned something about myself. I've learned that I want more than just data. I want to understand people, not as a researcher, but as someone who is part of this world now. Your world." Max looked at her, his feelings a mix of relief and confusion. But how can we make this work? You're not even supposed to be here like this. Lyra reached out, gently taking his hand in hers. I don't know what the rules or where I come from, Max, but I know that what we have is real. I can't pretend it's not. Maybe we don't have all the answers right now. Maybe there's still a lot we don't understand. But I'm willing to try. With you. Max squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of her words. He didn't have all the answers either. There were so many unknowns, but one thing was clear to him. He didn't want to lose her. Not now, not after everything they had shared. I'm willing to try too, Lyra, Max said, his voice steady. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm not going to turn away from what we have. We'll figure it out together. Lyra smiled, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Max felt certain of one thing. No matter the challenges that lay ahead, they would face them together. Their worlds might have been different, but they had something stronger now, a connection that transcended the boundaries of space and time. And in that moment, Max knew that whatever came next, he would never let go of Lyra. Not when they had found something so rare, so beautiful, and so real. Max and Lyra's relationship had blossomed into something beautiful. They shared long walks through the city, quiet evenings under the stars, and deep conversations about everything and nothing. The more time they spent together, the more Max realized that his life had changed in ways he never thought possible. Lyra, the alien from another world, was no longer just a visitor to Earth. She was a part of his world, his life. But despite their growing bond, there was still something weighing on Max's mind. The truth of Lyra's mission was starting to settle in. She had come to Earth with a purpose, to observe, to learn. But her feelings for him were no longer just part of her assignment. They were real. And that left Max with a question that he couldn't shake. How long would it last? What if their love was just temporary? What if their paths would eventually pull them apart? One night, as they sat in the small cafe where they first met, Max couldn't keep his thoughts to himself any longer. The cafe was quiet, the soft clinking of coffee cups the only sound in the air. He looked at Lyra, who was sipping her drink, her silver eyes sparkling under the dim light. Lyra, he began, his voice careful. Do you ever think about what happens next? I mean, after all of this, after your mission. Lyra lowered her cup, her expression softening. She had been waiting for this moment, though she hadn't expected it to come so soon. Max had always been the one to take things slow, to carefully consider every step. But now, it seemed like the time had come for them to confront the future. I think about it all the time, she admitted. I've been thinking about it even before I met you. My mission was always supposed to be temporary, just a way for me to gather information. But then, she paused, her eyes meeting his. Then I met you. Max felt a lump form in his throat. He had hoped, deep down, that she felt the same way. But hearing her say it out loud, hearing her acknowledge how much things had changed between them, made his heart race. But what happens when your mission is over? He asked softly. What do we do then? Lyra sighed, leaning back in her chair. I don't know, Max. The truth is, I never expected to fall for someone on this planet. My people, we don't form attachments like humans do. We don't even understand what it means to love. I came here to study, to learn, not to get involved in relationships. She smiled wryly. But here I am, deeply involved in one. Max smiled too, his heart lightening at her words. I never expected it either. But here we are. Lyra's smile faded slightly, her expression turning serious. The thing is, Max, my people, they have very strict rules. I don't know how they would react if they found out about us. And I don't know if they would let me stay here, not like this. Max felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had known that this might be an issue, but hearing Lyra voice her doubts made it feel more real. So what are you saying? That we might not have a future together. I'm not saying that, Lyra replied quickly, her voice soft yet firm. "I'm saying that we don't know what's ahead. There are things beyond our control, Max. My mission, it's not over yet, but that doesn't mean I want to lose you." Max took her hand in his, giving it a gentle squeeze. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He didn't want to lose her either. They had something special, something that couldn't be ignored or easily dismissed. They had a connection that was deep and real. "I don't know what's going to happen either," Max said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside him. "But I'm not ready to give up on us. We'll figure it out together." Lyra smiled, her silver eyes full of warmth. "I'm glad you feel that way, because I don't want to give up on us either." As they sat there, holding hands, a sense of quiet determination settled over them. The future might be uncertain, but they knew they had each other. And that was enough for now. The next few days brought a new sense of urgency to their relationship. Lyra continued her observations, but Max could sense that she was holding something back, a part of herself that she wasn't ready to share. He respected her space, but he also couldn't help but wonder what she was struggling with. One afternoon, as they walked through the city park, Lyra finally spoke up. "Max, there's something I need to tell you. It's about my people, about the council." Max looked at her, his heart racing. "What is it?" Lyra took a deep breath, her expression serious. "If the council finds out about us, they won't allow me to stay here. They don't believe that humans are capable of understanding our ways, and they don't want us to form attachments with your species." Max's heart sank. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made it feel more real. "So what does that mean for us?" Lyra's eyes were filled with regret. "It means that we might not have much time left. If they find out about us, I'll be forced to leave." Max felt a surge of panic. "But I can't lose you, Lyra." "I won't." She squeezed his hand, her gaze steady. "We still have time, Max, and maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to make it work. But we have to be careful. If we're not, it could be the end of everything." Max nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. He wasn't sure how they would get through this, but he knew one thing. He wasn't ready to give up on Lyra. Not now, not ever. The days were getting longer, the sun hanging high above, casting its warm light over the city. Max and Lyra had made their decision, and now all that remained was to act. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. Their love had already faced so many obstacles, but this was the biggest challenge of them all. The future they dreamed of was within their reach, but only if they dared to take the final step. Max knew this wasn't just about them anymore. It was about making a choice for the future, one that could change everything, not just for them, but for both worlds. As much as he wished for a peaceful resolution, he knew that some battles weren't won through words alone. Action was required. Lyra sat beside him, the two of them on a quiet bench overlooking the city. Her silver eyes, usually full of concern, were now determined. She had spent days thinking over her options, trying to find the best path forward. Max could see it in her face. She was ready. "Are you sure about this?" Max asked, his voice soft but filled with a deep sense of urgency. He had asked the same question many times over the last week, but now there was no room for hesitation. Lyra nodded, her gaze steady. "Yes, I've made my choice. I don't want to hide anymore. I don't want to live in fear of being torn away from you." Max squeezed her hand. The simple gesture spoke volumes. He had always known she was strong, but now he saw the true depth of her courage. She was willing to stand up for them both, even if it meant risking everything. "There's no turning back, Lyra," he said. His words were a reminder of the gravity of their decision, but they also held a promise that no matter what happened, he would be there with her every step of the way. "I know," she whispered, her voice steady, "but I've never been more sure of anything in my life." They sat in silence for a few moments, taking in the city's skyline, both lost in their thoughts. It wasn't just the city they were fighting for. It was their chance to live a life that was theirs, a life where they could be free, where they could love without fear. The plan was set, and it had to happen tonight. Lyra had managed to gain access to one of the Council's communications channels. It was a risky move, but it was their only chance to make sure they wouldn't be separated. As the night approached, Max and Lyra made their way to the small room in Max's apartment, where they had prepared everything. The lights were dim, and the atmosphere was tense. They had worked tirelessly to ensure they wouldn't be discovered, and now everything depended on their ability to stay calm and focused. Lyra stood in front of the communication console, her fingers hovering above the keys. Max stood beside her, his heart racing. This was it. This was the moment that would decide their future. "Are you ready?" Max asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded. "I have to be." With a deep breath, she began typing, sending a message to the Council. It wasn't just a message. It was a declaration that she had chosen Max and that she would no longer serve the Council's demands. As the message was sent, a heavy silence filled the room. The weight of what they had just done pressed down on both of them. There was no turning back now. Lyra turned to Max, her face pale but determined. "Now we wait." The next few hours felt like an eternity. The tension in the room was thick, each minute stretching on forever. Max paced back and forth, unable to keep still. He knew this was the moment that would change their lives. But he also knew that the Council might not take kindly to their defiance. Suddenly, the console beeped. Lyra's hands shook as she reached for it, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what that beep meant. It was the response from the Council. Max stood behind her, his breath held, as she read the message. "Well?" he asked, his voice trembling with anticipation. Lyra's expression softened, and for the first time that evening, a smile crossed her lips. "They've agreed," she said, her voice filled with disbelief. "They're allowing me to stay, but only on one condition." Max's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Lyra's eyes met his, her smile widening. "That we continue to work for peace. We have to show them that we're willing to find a way to bridge the gap between our worlds. And we do it together." Max couldn't believe it. After everything they had been through, after all the fear and doubt, this was the outcome. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. They had won. Together. He pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly. "We did it," he whispered. Lyra rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. She had feared that they would be torn apart forever, but now the future looked brighter than ever. "We did," she replied, her voice soft with contentment. "And we'll keep fighting. For us. For our love. For peace." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, they knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, obstacles, and people who would try to tear them apart. But they also knew something that no one could ever take from them. They had chosen each other. And as long as they had that, nothing else mattered. The night was still, the city stretching out before them. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, determination, and love. And as they looked out at the stars above, they both knew this was only the beginning. The days that followed the conversation in the park were filled with a sense of urgency. Max and Lyra had always been careful, but now their every move felt like it was under a microscope. Lyra's fears about her people discovering their relationship weighed heavily on her, and Max could see it. She was distant at times, her mind clearly somewhere else, even when they were together. Max couldn't blame her. The thought of being torn away from her, of losing what they had, was enough to make anyone worry. He understood the risk she was facing, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something needed to change. If they didn't act soon, they might lose everything. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the city, they sat in the small garden outside Max's apartment. The silence between them was comfortable, but it carried the weight of unspoken thoughts. Lyra sat with her hands in her lap, her gaze lost in the horizon, while Max watched her carefully. "Lyra," he said, breaking the silence, "have you thought any more about what we talked about?" She turned to him, her silver eyes reflecting the fading light. "I have. Every day. But I don't know what to do. Max, my people, they don't understand. They'll never understand." Max reached out, gently taking her hand. "I don't need them to understand. I need you to stay. We can figure it out together." Lyra squeezed his hand, but her expression was still filled with uncertainty. "It's not that simple, Max. The council has the power to send me back, to separate us. And if I disobey them, I could be exiled. I wouldn't be able to come back. Ever." Max felt his heart tighten. The stakes had always been high, but hearing it laid out so plainly made it feel real in a way it never had before. The weight of the situation was suffocating. "But that doesn't mean it's the end for us," he said softly. "We don't have to do what they expect. We can make our own choices, Lyra. We can find a way to be together, even if it means making difficult decisions." Lyra's eyes searched his face, as if she were trying to find the truth in his words. "And what if we can't? What if it's too dangerous? What if we end up hurting each other?" Max felt a pang of fear in his chest. The idea of hurting Lyra was the last thing he wanted. But at the same time, he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. He had to believe that they could make it work. "We'll figure it out," he said with more conviction than he felt. "We have to try. I won't just give up on us." For a long moment, Lyra said nothing. She simply stared at their joined hands, deep in thought. Max could see the internal struggle on her face. He knew she was torn between her duty to her people and her love for him. It was a fight that no one else could understand. Finally, Lyra looked up, her expression more resolute than it had been before. "Okay," she said, her voice firm. "We'll try, but we have to be careful. If we act too quickly, it could make things worse. I need to make sure I'm not being washed. I'll need time to figure out what our next step is." Max nodded. "We have time. We'll do it on our terms. No rushing." Lyra smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing for the first time in days. "Thank you, Max, for not giving up on me." Max smiled back, his heart swelling with emotion. "I'll never give up on you, Lyra. Never." Over the next few days, Max and Lyra took careful steps to protect their relationship. Lyra made sure to keep a low profile, avoiding any contact with her superiors or anyone who might report back to the council. She spent more time at Max's apartment, where they could be alone and plan their next move without the risk of being seen. They discussed everything: the potential consequences of their actions, the risks, and the ways they could fight for their love. Max had always been a problem solver, but this was unlike anything he had ever faced before. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about choosing a future, no matter how uncertain or dangerous it might be. Max's mind often wandered to the future. He knew that no matter how careful they were, there were things beyond their control. But he wasn't afraid. He wasn't afraid of losing Lyra, because he had already decided that he couldn't live without her. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Max turned to Lyra, his voice serious. "Do you think we can really make it work?" he asked. "Do you think your people will ever accept us?" Lyra paused before answering. "I don't know, Max. I don't know if they'll ever accept it. But I do know one thing. I don't want to live without you. If it means fighting for us, I'll do it. I'll fight for you." Max's heart skipped a beat. The words were simple, but they carried so much weight. They weren't just words. They were a promise. "I'll fight for you too, Lyra," he said, his voice filled with determination. For the first time in days, Lyra's smile reached her eyes. It wasn't the uncertain smile she had been giving him. This one was filled with hope. Together, they were ready to face whatever came next.